Thank you again for joining us on Searching for Answers, a program designed to help you, the viewers, as well as all of us here on the panel, to better understand the Bible. And if you will get your Bibles, even different interpretations of the Bibles, we're still in the book of Luke. But before we go there, I'd like to introduce on my right my good friend
John Jones, the School of Religion at La Sierra University.
John Pauline, Dean of the School of Religion at Loma Linda University.
Ivan Blazin, Loma Linda University.
And I'm Carolyn Thompson. And I believe John Jones has some things he wants to say, a little bit carryover from our last segment. John.
Oh, dear. Well, actually, this is something that we were all talking about
Yes,
together.
it is. Uh-huh.
And I think just at the closing moment, we were reflecting on the punchiness with which Luke tells these stories and with which Jesus speaks also, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And the fact that sometimes a story that may appear in Matthew and or Mark may appear in Luke in a somewhat condensed, very focused way, because Luke is always headed somewhere, isn't he? Mm-hmm. He's going after a particular point, and he knows how to get there as briskly and efficiently as he can. We simply see that in his style. What might be some of those examples or characteristic features? Either of you want to jump in on that at all?
Well, I think Luke is very concerned to date some events, like the baptism of Jesus, and roughly, and how the events of the cross relate to the other events of that week, and so forth. He's interested in how the events relate to the surrounding world, to some of the history events of that time. Perhaps maybe a scientific bent. I mean, if he was a physician, physicians did not have some of the level of scientific expertise we have today, but they were probably more scientifically oriented than most of the people at that time. And so you see Luke having an interest. By the way, one of the funny things about it is there's a story about a woman who has an issue of blood for 12 years and so forth. Well, Mark goes on and on and on, really trashing the medical profession. Yeah. He goes on, he says, she spent everything she had on doctors, and they made it worse.
Suffered many things.
Luke just kind of brushes that off.
Yeah, just kind of does.
Skips
Good
that.
idea. Well, fitting what you're saying, John.
You see a little bit of his personality coming through here.
Yeah.
And remember, we shouldn't forget, I don't think we are, the first few verses of this gospel where he indicates, like a true historian, there is a book called Luke the Historian, that he's investigated everything very carefully, and many have undertaken to write the thing of Jesus, and he's looked at all of that with utter care, and now he presents this to give us the truth and so on. So that fits in, I think, with what you're talking about, John.
Actually, one theory is that this is actually a legal brief, because Luke and Acts end with Paul's trial in Rome, and he's going to come before Nero and so forth. And some have thought that this Luke Acts, the two together, are kind of briefing the emperor on what Jesus is all about, and then also what Paul was all about, and why he was there, and attempting, in a sense, to make the story of Jesus and the story of the early apostles sensible for that type of officialdom. And that's only a theory, but that would explain some of the carefulness and structure as well in this particular.
Well, just quickly, that would have briefed also the defense in a bit, wouldn't it? I mean, a saying like, "My kingdom is not of this world, else would my servants or disciples fight," would have been a saying that would have had great function in the early church. God's kingdom is not of this world, else would we fight, but we don't, So I think that sword, if I may, cuts both ways. I think it does indeed present a picture of Jesus and his teaching to the big bad world out there. Reciprocally, it says something to what it is to be one of his followers as well.
We can recall, too, somehow got locked in on the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke, but, they're wondering when the kingdom will come.
Yeah.
And he says, you don't know those times and seasons, but, it's given to you to preach the gospel. And the whole idea in Luke is to Judea and Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the world, which is what encompasses Luke and Acts. You know, when Paul goes on his missionary journeys, Peter has his particular mission, and so on. The interesting thing is, we all are under the impression, or most of us, maybe not everyone, I think, that Luke wrote his gospel probably after Mark and probably in the 80s, and he knows more about things, but he ends the gospel, he ends the book of Acts with Paul in prison in Rome, and that's the end of the story, and he must know more, and it would fit in with to the uttermost parts of the world, but he has to have had a program in mind. When he's got Paul to Rome testifying to all of the Praetorian Guard, you know, that's like bang, you know.
The ends of the earth.
That's the ends of the earth.
All right, John, Pauline, would you, I think we stopped with 46. Let's begin with verse 47, still in the 22nd chapter, and just read on down a ways for me. Would you do that, please?
While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs?
Yes, my goodness.
Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns."
Oh, there it is.
What does it mean when darkness reigns? This is your hour when darkness reigns. What is that, John?
Well, who are these people that came to him? It says here,
The officers?
chief priests.
That's right.
So these are
Temple guard.
bishops,
The elders.
you know, senior pastors. These are folk whose entire life is devoted to God. Officers of the temple guard. Well, I mean, these were the, you know, what should we say, the security for, you know, the worship services. And the elders. I mean, that's also a religious term within the context.
But the last
back
sentence you read,
then.
but this is your hour.
So he is saying to the religious leaders, to the thought leaders of his day, the very ones whose lives were in service to God, he says, you are living in darkness.
And I think this darkness is related to what he had just said to his disciples in Gethsemane. Pray that you come not into the time of trial. This is the time of trial. This is the time when the darkness reigns, and so forth and so on. So this is when things really get going. I'm kind of impressed with two questions that Jesus raises. And the one is verse 48. I mean, can you feel this? I mean, it is to be felt, I think. Judas, is it with a kiss? The word kiss comes first in the sentence. With a kiss?
You betraying the Son.
You would betray me, the Son of Man? I mean, with a kiss? So here's a question, sort of, I don't know if I want to say this has a little sarcasm in it. It has something in it. There's another question, too.
But, Ivan, you have to put flesh and blood on this.
Yeah, well, let's do it.
Why would Judas do this to Jesus? Did he want him killed? No. He thought that if he forced God into a situation, God meaning Jesus, that Jesus would throw over the Romans, declare his kingdom, and everybody would be happy and the Romans would be gone. And I mean, he was thinking something that he never realized, that Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world.
Yeah.
And so he thought he would force the situation. That's my take on it.
Sure. And it's difficult, isn't it, to live a life of nonviolence in a violent world.
Yes, yes.
At what point do you finally draw the line?
That's right. That's right.
It's an issue for his time, and in a way it is for us too.
Mm-hmm.
There was a film. Conservative Christians were not happy about this film. It came out years ago. It was called The Last Temptation of Christ. And it was based on a book called The Last Temptation of Christ. And the man is trying to portray Nicholas Kazantzakis, the continuing struggle between good and evil, that goes on all the time. And he uses the life of Jesus. He fictionalizes it in part, but there's also parts that are like the Gospels. But in that movie, in that film, Judas is always wanting Jesus to finally take up the reins, and it's his utter and absolute disappointment that he's not doing this, that he does what he does. So it's related to that in a way. It's related to what you were saying. So and many have had that idea that Judas is, a zealot type, and he would like to force it, but of course that is not what happens at all.
So we've seen two betrayals, haven't we? We've seen Judas sell Jesus, and as we come up in the very next verses, we're going to see Peter 3 times deny that he knows Jesus.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that Luke puts both those two figures in the same pole on the axis. Yeah? If you can think of a sideways V shape, it starts Jesus talking about Judas, and then he talks about being faithful to him and how he will give the disciples who stay with him a kingdom in which, however, the least is the greatest and the greatest is least. And then it comes out with Peter and that whole exchange about betrayal. Peter and Judas are both at the one axis of that development. The other side is suffering, sharing in Jesus' hardship and temptations, humility, and accepting the least role for the sake of the kingdom. That's where the axis falls. But both of these two characters have much in common. Judas, in a way, repents in a certain sense. That is to say, what the ancient Greeks called the moment of discovery in Greek drama, where he awakens to what he's done and takes his own life. Peter weeps bitterly. But even Peter still has a further lesson to learn, according to church history, because later on he walks out of Rome when he escapes from prison, according to the story, meets Jesus coming into Rome to take his place, be crucified again, and at that point, Peter finally gets it and turns around and goes back in. In a way, the story of Peter surely is in here as a cautionary tale for early Christians. How do you relate, again, to violence? How do you relate to persecution? And part of the answer is not by bravado, not by jumping up and saying, "Look at me, Lord, I'm going to go with you to prison and to death if need be." There were people who volunteered to be martyrs in the early church. But the lesson of Peter is that that's not necessarily what we're called to do. And certainly not by bragging and boasting and trying to show off. Rather, it is neither a matter of surrender nor of strutting around in macho kind of displays of how stridently tough we can be. Rather, we are called to simply be humble, quiet children of the kingdom, the upside-down kingdom in which the least are greatest. Yeah. Isn't it so?
Yes, it's true. Well, now, shall we continue reading?
Well, I'm afraid I may have anticipated, but
you
Peter...
can go ahead and read.
But Peter and Judas are interesting parallels to each other.
They are. And they do mention them together.
Could I just throw this into the mix? No?
Yes, of course.
I mean, this is from the Gospel of Matthew now, but it might be worthy here to mention that, Peter makes the great confession, who do you say that I am? And Peter confesses him as the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says that's a matter of revelation. And then just a short time after, as Jesus talks about his sufferings, it is Peter who denies that should ever happen. That's not in the picture, that Jesus should submit to or be a part of. The suffering Messiah doesn't make sense. And so I think that pipes in a little bit to what you say here. Maybe we take power, you know. Surely Jesus doesn't submit to power. We wield power, the swords that we were talking about so much in the previous story.
Yeah.
So Peter plays strange roles here in the Gospels.
For our edification.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
Well, the next little chunk here is verses 54 all the way down to 62. I don't know how much of this you want to do here, but we'll try to clip down through it.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid I've anticipated this a bit already, but it's familiar material. Having arrested him, they led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest. But Peter was following at a distance. And after they'd kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter was sitting among them. And a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the firelight and looking intently at him, said, this man was with him too. But he denied it, saying, Woman, I don't know him. And a little later, another saw him and said, You are one of them too. Peter said, Man, I am not. And after about an hour had passed, another man began to insist, saying, Certainly this man was also with him. He's a Galilean too. Peter said, Man, I don't know what you're talking about. And immediately while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed.
Can you imagine?
The Lord turned and looked at Peter. And then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said, Before a rooster crows today, you'll deny me 3 times. He went out and wept bitterly.
Yeah.
It's a heartbreaking story.
It is a heartbreaking story. But see, Judas, he realized he was wrong, but he couldn't take it. He killed himself.
Yeah.
But Peter actually wept bitterly for his sin that he had done because he remembered what Jesus had said. The men who were guarding Jesus began mocking and beating him. They blindfolded him and demanded, Prophesy, who hit you? And they said many other insulting things to him. At daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and teachers of the law, met together, and Jesus was led away before them. If you are the Christ, they said, tell us. Jesus answered, If I tell you, you will not believe me, and if I ask you, you would not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the mighty God. They all asked, Are you then the Son of God? He replied, You are right in saying I am. Then they said, Why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips. John, Pauline, what were they referring to? Didn't they realize who he was, or were they just going with the crowd?
I think, again, when it comes to religious leaders, I think one of the dynamics going on here is whenever you institutionalize religion, maybe I can put it this way, institutions of religion are human responses to a sense of God's calling. In other words, it's an attempt to respond to God. It's an attempt to make that response efficient and so forth. In the end, institutions as a whole tend to suffer from the same problem that we suffer from as individuals, and that is selfishness. It's what we sometimes call corporate selfishness. The danger you get into is preserving the institution, preserving this historic response to God becomes more important than being faithful to the original call that God had made. Now, Jesus shows up. He's clearly a prophet. I mean, they're sensing that, but they're ready to treat him like they treated most of the other prophets, and that was to say, well, we don't like what you're saying, so please change your story, or we'll change it for you. And here, Jesus is saying, not only am I a prophet,
I'm the Son of God.
but they're sensing, and he doesn't say it, but they can't get away from that idea. There's something about Jesus. He reads their minds and their hearts.
He does.
And that is the most powerful conviction that God is present. When you just sense that you're reality has been read by another. And so then they're saying, well, are you really the Son of God? He says, well, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. He's being difficult again.
Yeah.
Perhaps almost a little bit of a humorous dig at this point. But he has challenged the system. And you don't do that and survive too
He's
often.
challenged it in some very creative ways that stretch the envelope, don't they? Yeah. Isn't it interesting that from the Jewish side, the question is, are you the Messiah? We don't have chapter divisions in the early manuscripts, so the story goes on. Right away, next paragraph, Pilate's going to ask him, are you king? He wants to ask the political question. You get right at that. In both cases, Jesus kind of says, well, if you say so. Indeed, his answer to the Sanhedrin is, you will see the Son of Man standing by the side of God. And they come back, does that make you Son of God? And he finally says, have it your way. Always that ambiguity. Jesus simply doesn't fit into boxes very well. And I think that's laying the foundation for the gospel going beyond Judaism and into the larger world, so that every nation and kindred and people can fit him in some sense into their own box, and yet he still explodes their boxes too.
But
There's
don't
something
you-
about Jesus that stretches the realities of the day.
Don't you find something interesting here? I mean, at least I say that. That's like a leading question. I mean, let's see if you find it interesting or not. But when they say, are you then the Son of God? We're so used to saying that Jesus is the Son of God.
Yeah.
Don't you find it a little bit interesting that they would ask that question? Jews thought of God as one God. They didn't think of the Son of God. They can think of the children of Israel, God's people, as the Son of God. Hosea, out of Egypt, I've brought my son.
Yeah.
That's Israel, and so on. So how does it happen that the people here, and this is even before the death of Jesus and before the resurrection of Jesus, when those reflections will take place, which will lead us to conclude eventually that Jesus is something more than a mere man, and he's the Messiah, and in fact he's Messiah in a certain very divine sense. He's the Son of God. But how does it happen that such an expression comes here? Is this the faith of the church telling the story now? So that
Looking back
the
on
church reads the story in the light of its ultimate confession, he is the Son of God. Well, there's something tantalizing about all this, and so on. It's, the Son of Man, that's, here you think of, Daniel 7, one like the Son of Man came and he receives a kingdom, and that refers ultimately to the people of God receiving a kingdom. Nothing strange about that so much. But the Son of God statement is very interesting on their lips at this time.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we continue on? Ivan, would you do that for me, please?
Oh, sure.
It's now
Let me
chapter
just
23.
mention one more thing. You've maybe talked about this in previous
Okay.
programs, but one of the fascinating things about the New Testament is Jesus never calls himself the Son of God.
That's right.
He always calls himself the Son of Man. The church later on almost never calls him Son of Man. Only once, as Stephen looking
Right.
up to heaven calls Jesus Son of Man. But Son of Man disappears.
Yeah.
And the church calls him the Messiah or the Son of God. And both of those are terms that he pushed aside while
Why
he
do
was
you
alive.
suppose he did that?
Well, one of the most common theories is that Jesus wanted to avoid undoing his ministry too soon. When you see how they reacted to Son of God
Yes.
here, and I think in Matthew it is, are you the Messiah? Or even here it says, if you are the Messiah, if you're the Christ, tell us. And then it moves he comes back with Son of Man, and then they say, well, does that mean you're the Son of God? So you see, Son of God and Messiah are loaded terms for them. It's a huge claim that they were looking to the Messiah to endorse the institution, endorse the system, and drive out opposing institutions. Jesus comes along and he seems to be undermining the institution of faith.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to continue
Well-
reading chapter 23?
Yeah, this is
Then
gonna-
the whole
oh,
assembly
okay.
rose. Okay, John Pauline.
Sure. Then the whole assembly rose and led him off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We have found this man subverting our nation." See, there he is. He's undermining the
That's
institution,
right.
the system. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar. Well, that would not seem to be undermining the nation, which was opposed to the Romans. But here they're making an argument for Pilate's benefit. So he claims to be Christ, the Messiah, a king. So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no basis for a charge against this man." But they insisted. "He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here."
Now, this is an incredible story.
Oh, this is an incredible
We got to
story.
unpack this a little bit, but are we getting to the end
Yes,
again?
we're getting to the end.
Oh, yes.
But there is so much in this. These few verses are just packed with things that we need to talk about. So I think we better wait till next time. But I think the fact that we're going over this very, very carefully, it will help our viewers to really get involved in what we're talking about. And we may not understand everything, but I think as you study different versions of the Bible, or even I love Barclay, for instance, and also Phillips, it will help us by looking at different versions, different ways it's said. Hopefully it will help all of us, because I'm, just here among you theologians, and I have to really be careful to keep up with all of you, but I do my best. Anyway, we enjoy doing this, and in the meantime, we would ask you to please tune in again for Searching for Answers.